All right, folks, we've made it to module 3, and this is your final module where you're going to be learning what the most important thing you can do to really help dramatically improve your photos. And I find that even with students that have been playing around with digital photography for years and years, they still don't realize that their digital SLR has this capability and they aren't setting this correctly with their pictures. So what is it that I'm talking about? Well, I'm talking about learning how to focus your camera correctly and how to use the autofocus mechanism to your advantage. You can only take sharp photos when you know how to focus your camera, and you can only control blur, intentional blur, because of out of focusness or depth of field or motion when you know how to focus. So what you need to do before you can do any of those things is to take control of your focus, and generally take control of your focus points. Now, first of all, let's talk a little bit about autofocus or manual focus. Sometimes people get confused when we talk about using your camera in a more manual way. They feel that they're going to have to use the manual focus settings on their lens, but this isn't generally the case. Most lenses that come with your digital SLR or that you purchase for your digital SLR have the ability to be both used in manual settings and autofocus settings. And this is where it is on my Canon lens here. You'll see the AF for autofocus and the MF for manual. Now, if I have my switch switched to manual focus, then I focus with the front of the lens, and then actually in this case the focus ring is back here. This is different to the zoom lens that brings my lens closer or further away depending on the focal length that I choose. This has got to do with the focus. So if you're in manual focus, the autofocus will not function when you press your finger on the shutter button. Most people prefer to use the autofocus, which means when you slightly depress your finger on the shutter button, the camera will decide on what it is you want to focus on and pull that very quickly into autofocus. Now, I can tell you that the autofocus is generally very, very good in cameras that have been made within the last 4 or 5 years, but you still have to know how to work it correctly so that you're getting the best results. Now, as an aside, down here you see that I have an on-off switch here as well, and this refers to image stabilization. In Nikon cameras it's called vibration reduction, and that would be switched to on or off. So you always want to have that switched to on unless you're using your camera on a tripod. Now, so the most important thing is that you must tell the camera in autofocus, you must tell the camera what it is that you want to focus on, because if you leave it up to the camera, it will generally pick the largest thing in the frame or the closest thing to you in the frame, and if you're being creative with your images, you may not want that to be the focus point. So what I like to do is I like to have the center focus point in my camera to be my main point of focus. Now that doesn't mean that it's always everything in the center is going to be the sharpest. I just want to have that center focus point as my focus point, and then I can adjust after that. So we'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. Depending on the camera you'll have several different focus points. So this is a reflection of the 7D, where there's a whole bunch of different focus points. You may only have 3, or you may have 16, or you may have some variation of that. So that means that any one of these points can be your point of focus and the sharpest point of your image. And generally it'll pick several of these if it's an automatic setting. But what I am saying I like to do is I just decide and pick one particular point that is my focus point, and that is where my sharpest part of my image is going to be. So how do we do that? Well, you use the function called focus point selection, and on the Canon the shortcut button is there. This is where it is here. We have a lot of dual buttons, but usually on the Canon it's this top right hand button right behind, kind of where your thumb is at, and this will bring up those little boxes in the screen, and you can use the jog dial on the back of your camera to navigate between which one of those you could choose. Now, like I say, you could choose any of those, top, right, left, or bottom, but I like to choose the center one just because I know where it's at, and I use what's called the focus lock method to focus my images. But you could just decide, okay, I'm going to choose the extreme right hand one or the extreme left hand one if you can see that your subject is going to be there. In the Nikon cameras, you'll see that this is your focus point right here, and you choose it. I think it's this one here, which is your focus point selection. Just double check it with your camera manual. But generally, if it's on auto, you'll see it's just a plain white rectangle here, and you want to be able to maneuver that around. And how you do that is with the jog dial. Now, on the entry-level Nikon, something that we've come across is that you can accidentally shift this left or right, on accident by moving this jog dial here. So even if you have it set to the center and you said maybe push this with your cheek, which can happen, you can push this with your cheek, which can happen, it could be moved off to the left or right. So just be cautious of that. So by setting your focus point selection, you can avoid photographs like this, where the camera picked up on this part of the image to focus on and not on this little dandelion here, which is what I wanted. But by being able to control my focus point selection, I can make sure that this is the area that I want to focus at. And it helps to let the camera discern to throw the background out of focus. Now, the bokeh and everything with the background being in focus is controlled by other things. The depth of field is controlled by aperture and distance and all that sort of stuff as well. Again, it's outside of what we would talk about here in this class. But the first thing to do to get that right is to make sure that you have your focus point set. Okay, so we have decided to pick one single point of focus of your image, and that is right at the center. But you don't want your subject to be right in the center of your image. So how do we do that? Well, like I said, you have two different ways that you can do that on your camera. You can toggle focus, which means you can move your focus point to the left or to the right, up or down in the frame by using the jog dial in the back of the on the back of the camera. And therefore you put the little black rectangle or the red square, whatever it is, over the point of focus, which is good if you can anticipate where your subject is going to be. But how I like to do it is using the off-center focusing method, or otherwise known as the focus lock method. And so what I do is having my subject in the middle of my frame, I will then press and hold my shutter button while pointing at it. So the focus is now locked on that subject. And then with my hand and my finger still depressed on the shutter button, I can shift the camera off to the left or to the right, holding the focus on my subject even though my subject is now off center, and then go ahead and take the photograph. So what you'll need to do is to practice this, and generally you'll probably have to be in the program auto mode in order to do this. It may not let you do it in the automatic settings, although it will depend on camera model, and a lot of the camera models have changed in that way too. So you center your subject in the viewfinder, press your shutter halfway down to focus on your subject, and then recompose the shot off to the left or to the right, depending on where you want your subject in the frame. And this is very important for getting a really nice sharp shot, and it can dramatically change how you're using your camera. And I would suggest that you pick this with practice this with a variety of different subjects, focusing like on the eyes for a portrait shot, and then recomposing to maybe get more of their body in, focusing on, say, a child holding a soccer ball or the soccer ball off to the side, and then and focusing on the child, but then recomposing so that the ball is in focus as well, and trying to blur out different parts of the image. So it'll take a little bit of practice. It's a little difficult to explain over the internet, but I guarantee you with a little bit of practice and breaking down and slowing yourself down to see what is actually happening, you will be able to decipher it and therefore control your focus. So that ends up module 3, and actually the end of this little mini course, Easy Ways to Take Better Photos with Your Digital SLR. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you have learned something and feel a little bit more confident in using your digital camera now than you did before you started. If you think you'd like to learn more about your digital SLR, please check out my course called Demystify Your DSLR, where we go into much greater detail on things such as the mode dial, the different exposure modes, aperture, shutter speed. We talk about composition, we talk about what to do with your photos after you've taken them, and it is a lot more in depth. You can find it at www.demystifyyourdslr.com, and it is a recorded class and currently available at $99. Each class or each module is 1 hour in length, so a lot more information than what you're getting with this one, but it can be broken down and you can enjoy it at your leisure, and once you sign up you will have lifetime access to that information. So once again, it's been Ingrid Owens here from Beginners Photography blog and Camera Shy. Thank you so much for watching, and please stay in touch.